The winter of 1886 brought a merciless blizzard to the Arizona Territory, the likes of which hadn't been seen in living memory. Temperatures plummeted to bone-chilling lows as howling winds drove snow in blinding sheets across the high desert. In this unforgiving wilderness, Rachel Miller found herself alone in a small stone cabin, her husband's grave not yet covered by the first snowfall, with 2 newborn infants depending on her for survival. As their supplies dwindled with each passing day and hope faded with each sunset, Rachel had resigned herself to the cruel fate that seemed inevitable, until a shadow appeared at her door. A Navajo hunter named Key Begay separated from his. People in the Snowstorm would make a discovery that would forever alter the course of 3 desperate lives. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Rachel Miller gazed through the frost-etched window of the stone cabin, watching as relentless snow continued to blanket the landscape. Just 1 month earlier, her life had been filled with promise. She and her husband William had journeyed west from Ohio with dreams of establishing a prosperous sheep ranch in the Arizona Territory. The modest parcel of land they'd purchased sat near a reliable water source with good grazing potential in a valley nestled between dramatic red rock formations. William had worked tirelessly to construct their cabin before winter, determined to create a safe haven for his growing family, but William would never see their dreams fulfilled. 2 days after Rachel had given birth to their twins, a boy and a girl, William had ventured out to secure additional firewood. In his weakened state from weeks of overwork and too little food, he had succumbed to the bitter cold. Rachel had found him the next morning, just 50 yards from their cabin door, with her body still recovering from childbirth and her heart shattered by grief. Rachel had somehow managed to dig a shallow grave for William on a small rise behind the cabin. She'd marked it with a cross fashioned from juniper branches, now barely visible beneath the mounting snow. The twins, Robert and Rebecca, were remarkably robust, despite arriving 3 weeks before expected. But Rachel knew their situation grew more dire with each passing hour. The blizzard had raged for 3 days with no sign of abating. Her firewood supply was dwindling alarmingly, and she had barely enough food to last another week if she rationed carefully. The nearest settlement, a trading post called Copper Springs, was nearly 20 miles away, an impossible journey on foot in these conditions, especially with 2 newborns. Rachel had sent a letter to her sister in Ohio before the babies were born, but even in the best conditions, mail took weeks to reach the Arizona Territory from the east. No help would come from that direction in time. As night fell and the temperature dropped even further, Rachel added one of the last substantial logs to the fire, leaving only a handful of smaller branches and kindling. Soon, she would need to start breaking up the furniture William had painstakingly crafted if they were to survive another day. The twins began to fuss in unison, their hungry cries piercing the howling wind. Rachel moved to the makeshift cradle William had built before they were born. She lifted Rebecca first, then Robert, cradling them both in her arms as she settled into the rocking chair positioned close to the fire's dwindling warmth. "Hush now," she whispered, opening her nightgown to feed them. "We'll find a way through this," but the confidence in her voice masked the growing desperation in her heart. Rachel hadn't slept more than an hour at a stretch since William died, constantly tending to the babies or struggling to maintain enough heat in the cabin to keep them all from freezing. Her milk was beginning to diminish from exhaustion and poor nutrition, the very thing her babies needed most to survive. As she rocked her children, Rachel's mind drifted to the life she'd left behind in Columbus. The daughter of a schoolteacher, she had trained as a midwife before meeting William at a church social. His dreams of Western expansion had seemed romantic then, a grand adventure for a young couple in love. How could she have known those dreams would lead her here, to this moment of utter isolation and impending tragedy? Rachel's parents had passed years earlier, and her only sister, Martha, was raising 4 children of her own. Even if her letter had reached Martha, what could her sister do? Send money for a journey Rachel couldn't possibly make with newborns? The bitter truth was that no rescue would come in time. Outside the cabin, the wind intensified, finding every crack and crevice in the stone walls. Snow sifted in beneath the door, despite Rachel's efforts to block it with strips of fabric torn from one of William's shirts. The temperature inside the cabin dropped noticeably, and Rachel pulled a worn quilt more tightly around herself and the twins. When the babies finished nursing, Rachel carefully returned them to their cradle, piling every available blanket around their tiny bodies. She moved to the window, rubbing a small circle in the frost to peer outside. The moon occasionally broke through the clouds, illuminating a landscape transformed into something alien and hostile. In that moment, Rachel felt more completely alone than she had ever imagined possible. Miles away across the snow-covered mesas, Kee Bigay huddled beneath an overhang of red rock, grateful for the meager shelter from the punishing storm. At 36 years old, Kee was one of his tribe's most accomplished hunters, but even he knew better than to attempt returning to the winter camp until the blizzard abated. Kee hadn't intended to venture this far from his people, but the sudden storm had disoriented him during a hunting expedition. He had managed to bring down a deer before the weather turned, securing meat that would sustain him until he could return to his family's winter hogan. The fire he'd built threw dancing shadows against the rock wall, providing modest warmth and protection from prowling predators. As Kee fed another branch into the flames, he contemplated his situation. The overhang provided adequate shelter, and he had food, but the intensity of the blizzard concerned him. Such storms could last for days, and temperatures this low could kill even the hardiest of men if they weren't properly protected. Kee's father had been a renowned medicine man among the Diné, teaching his son not only hunting skills, but also the sacred knowledge of living in harmony with the harsh desert environment. From his mother, a weaver known for her intricate rugs, Kee had learned patience and the importance of community bonds. Though he had chosen the path of a hunter rather than a healer, Kee carried his father's teachings with him always. His knowledge of survival techniques had repeatedly proven valuable, not just to his own people, but occasionally to lost settlers who wandered too far from established trails. Unlike some of his tribe who avoided all contact with the white newcomers, Kee had developed a pragmatic approach, occasionally trading with settlers and acting as a guide when needed. By the 3rd day in the rock shelter, Kee's instincts told him the storm would soon break. The wind had shifted slightly, and though snow still fell heavily, the howling had diminished. He began preparing for the journey back to his tribe's winter camp, knowing his wife, Azdza, and their 2 young sons would be worried about his prolonged absence. As dawn broke on the 4th day, Kee emerged from his shelter. The snow had finally stopped, though the sky remained ominously grey. He strapped on the snowshoes he had fashioned from pine branches and rawhide, adjusted his pack containing what remained of the deer meat, and began the arduous journey. He had traveled perhaps 3 miles when he noticed a thin wisp of smoke in the distance. Kee paused, squinting against the harsh white landscape. He hadn't realized there were any settler cabins in this area. The smoke was faint, too faint for a properly maintained fire, which suggested whoever was inside might be in trouble. Kee deliberated briefly. The tribe's winter camp was still at least a day's journey away, and they wouldn't be expecting him for several more days. Investigating the cabin would delay him only slightly, and he couldn't in good conscience ignore what might be a fellow human in distress. As he approached the small stone structure, Key noticed there were no tracks in the snow, no indication that anyone had gone in or out for days. The chimney emitted only the faintest trace of smoke. He circled the building once, noting the crude grave marker nearly buried in snow behind the cabin. Someone had died here recently. Inside the cabin, Rachel startled at the sound of footsteps crunching in the snow outside. Her heart raced with both hope and fear. Visitors could mean salvation, but this was still frontier country, where danger often arrived unannounced. She reached for William's rifle, which she kept loaded beside the door, though she doubted her ability to use it effectively if needed. "Who's there?" she called out weakly, her voice rough from disuse. The footsteps stopped directly outside the door, followed by a moment of silence. Then came a light knock. "I mean no harm," called a deep male voice with an accent Rachel couldn't place. "I saw your smoke. Do you need assistance?" Rachel hesitated, her hand still on the rifle. The twins began to stir at the sound of the unfamiliar voice. In quick decision, she moved to the door, keeping the rifle within reach. "I'm opening the door," she announced, fumbling with the frozen latch. When the door swung open, Rachel found herself face to face with a tall man, unlike any she had encountered before. He had strong, weathered features and piercing dark eyes that took in the scene before him with rapid assessment. He was dressed in animal hides and wool, with elaborate beadwork decorating his clothing. Snowshoes were strapped to his feet, and a hunting bow was slung across his back. Key immediately understood the situation. The woman before him was clearly exhausted, her face gaunt and her clothes hanging loosely on her frame. Behind her, he could see a fire dying in the hearth and hear the unmistakable sounds of infants whimpering. The cabin was cold, dangerously. "So we're nearly out of firewood. My name is Key Begay," he said, keeping his voice gentle and his hands visible. "I am a hunter from the Diné, the Navajo people. I was caught in the storm and am returning to my family. You appear to need help." Rachel stared at him, swaying slightly from fatigue. "I'm Rachel Miller," she finally responded. "My husband. He died just after our twins were born." Her voice broke. "We're nearly out of wood. I don't know what to do." Key nodded solemnly. "May I come in? I can help with firewood and food." Rachel stepped back, allowing him entry. As Key moved into the cabin, he noticed the makeshift cradle where two tiny infants lay bundled together. He also saw the nearly empty food stores and the pitiful pile of kindling beside the hearth. This woman and her babies would not have survived. "Another day without intervention. First, we need to rebuild your fire," Key said matter-of-factly, setting down his pack. "Then I will hunt for more food and gather proper firewood." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Rachel watched as the stranger efficiently rebuilt the dying fire, adding small pieces of kindling before retrieving an axe he spotted in the corner. Without another word, he went outside. Minutes later, she heard the sound of chopping. When he returned, his arms were laden with wood from a juniper tree he had felled nearby. "This will burn well," he explained, arranging the logs by the fire. "I've brought some venison as well." Rachel felt tears welling in her eyes, the first she had allowed herself since burying William. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know how to repay you." Key shook his head. "No payment is necessary. No one survives alone in such conditions." He glanced at the twins, who had settled again in their cradle. "How old are they?" "Just 3 weeks," Rachel replied, moving to check on them. "Robert and Rebecca. They're healthy, thank God, but I've been worried about keeping them warm enough, and my milk is diminishing." Key nodded thoughtfully. "The storm has passed, but it remains dangerous. Copper Springs is too far to travel with infants in these conditions." He hesitated before continuing. "My people's winter camp is a day's journey from here. They would welcome you until safer travel is possible." Rachel looked up in surprise. "Your people?" "The Diné," Key explained. My wife is a healer. She would know how to help with your milk and the baby's health." He paused. "The choice is yours, but you and your children would be safe there." Rachel looked around the cold cabin at the meager supplies, and then at her vulnerable infants. She thought of the impossible journey to Copper Springs and the weeks it would take for any response from her letter to arrive from Ohio, if it arrived at all. "Would they truly accept us?" she asked quietly. "They would," Key assured her. "My people value children above all else, and my position in the tribe will ensure your safety." He looked directly into her eyes. "I cannot in good conscience leave. You hear? But I will respect whatever decision you make." As night fell again, Rachel sat by the replenished fire, watching as Key efficiently prepared a stew from the venison he had brought. The cabin was warmer now, and for the first time in days, she felt a small flicker of hope. "We leave at first." "Light," Key instructed. "Sleep now. The journey will be demanding." Rachel nodded, exhaustion settling over her despite her anxiety about their departure. She checked on the twins one last time before crawling into her bed, wondering what William would think of her decision to trust their lives to a Navajo hunter. The alternative, however, was unthinkable. As she drifted toward sleep, she found herself grateful for the strange twist of fate that had brought Key to their door. Whatever lay ahead, at least her children would live to see another day, and for a mother on the brink of despair, that was everything. Morning arrived with temperatures even lower than the previous day, though the sky had cleared to a brilliant blue. Rachel dressed in multiple layers, preparing the twins similarly with what little warm clothing they had. Key had instructed her to pack William's thickest wool socks, which she now pulled over her worn boots for added insulation. Key entered the cabin after securing their supplies outside. "It is time," he said simply. With trembling hands, Rachel bundled Robert and Rebecca together, swaddling them tightly in the warmest blankets she possessed. Key had explained that keeping them together would help maintain their body heat. She placed them carefully in a fur-lined carrier he had fashioned overnight, securing them as he had demonstrated. "They look like little fox cubs," Key observed, with a rare smile, checking the bindings to ensure they were snug but not too tight. Rachel took one last look around the cabin, the home she and William had built with such hope. "I'll return," she whispered, as much to herself as to the empty room. Outside, the landscape stretched white and endless in every direction. The sun had just cleared the eastern horizon, casting long blue shadows across the snow. Rachel pulled her scarf over her nose and mouth as Key had advised, protecting her lungs from the frigid air. Key strapped on his snowshoes and handed Rachel a pair he had fashioned from branches and rawhide. "These will keep you from sinking," he explained, showing her how to secure them. "Walk in my tracks when possible. If you tire, tell me immediately." With that, he secured a harness across his chest and shoulders and began moving forward, testing the weight and balance of their supplies and the precious cargo of the twins. Robert and Rebecca remained silent, lulled perhaps by the gentle motion or simply too bundled to protest. Rachel followed, awkward at first on the unfamiliar snowshoes, but gradually finding her rhythm. The only sounds were the crunch of snow beneath them and the occasional distant call of a winter bird. They travelled steadily through the morning, Key setting a pace that Rachel could maintain. He stopped frequently to check on the twins and allow Rachel brief rests. Despite the brutal cold, Rachel found herself warming from the exertion, just as Key had predicted. Near midday, they paused in the shelter of a rock formation Key built. A small fire with practiced efficiency, melting snow for drinking water and warming strips of elk jerky. Rachel fed the twins, marveling at how contentedly they had travelled thus far. "They are strong, your children," Key commented, watching as Rachel burped little Robert. The Dene would say they have powerful spirits. Their father was strong, Rachel replied softly. I hope they will remember him somehow, even though they never truly knew him. They will know him through your stories, Key said. This is how all children learn of ancestors they did not meet in life. As they prepared to continue their journey, Rachel noticed Key scanning the horizon with a slight frown. Is something wrong? She asked, instantly alert. The wind is shifting, he replied. We should move quickly. We still have many miles to travel. By mid-afternoon, dark clouds had begun to gather in the west, and the wind had indeed picked up considerably. Key increased their pace, pushing harder through the deepening snow. Rachel struggled to keep up, her legs burning with exertion, but fear of another storm kept her moving forward without complaint. The first snowflakes began to fall as the light started to fade. Rachel's heart sank, remembering the ferocity of the previous blizzard. Key studied the sky, then scanned their surroundings with the practiced eye of an experienced hunter. We cannot reach the camp before this storm hits, he announced grimly. We must find shelter now. A half-mile further, Key spotted what they needed, a cluster of massive boulders creating a natural windbreak beside a dry wash. He directed Rachel toward it, explaining his plan as they walked. The rocks will block the wind. We can create shelter for the night. Rachel watched in amazement as Key efficiently constructed a lean-to using juniper branches harvested from nearby trees. He cleared snow from beneath it, creating a small protected space just large enough for Rachel, the twins, and himself. Using rocks, he built a small fire pit at the opening of the shelter, positioning it to reflect heat inward while allowing smoke to escape. By the time full darkness fell, the snow was coming down steadily, though the worst of the storm still appeared to be hours away. Inside their crude shelter, the twins lay swaddled between Rachel and Key, with the fire providing modest but crucial warmth. Will we reach your camp tomorrow? Rachel asked, trying to keep the worry from her voice. If the storm passes quickly, yes, Key replied. If not, we wait. Attempting to travel in a blizzard would be foolish. Rachel nodded, accepting his judgment. She watched as Key methodically fed small branches into the fire, his movements precise and economical. There was something deeply reassuring about his calm competence. How did you become separated from your tribe before you found us? She asked, realizing she knew almost nothing about the man who now held their lives in his hands. Key continued tending the fire as he answered, I was tracking a herd of deer. Game has been scarce this winter. When I spotted signs of the herd, I followed, thinking I could bring much-needed meat back to the camp. He shrugged slightly. The storm came faster than expected. I found shelter in a rock overhang and waited it out as we do now. Were you always a hunter? Rachel asked. A faint smile crossed his face. Since I was old enough to hold a bow. My father taught me to track and hunt. He was a medicine man, what my people call a hatawi. He knew the healing plants and sacred ceremonies, but he also understood the importance of providing food. And your mother, a weaver, Key replied. One of the finest. The rugs she created were sought by traders from many places. His expression softened with memory. She passed to the spirit world 3 winters ago. I'm sorry, Rachel said sincerely. Key nodded in acknowledgement. She lived a good life, honored by our people. And do you have a family now? Of your own, I mean. A wife, Estza, and 2 sons, Key replied. Estza is skilled in the healing ways, like my father. My boys are 7 and 5 winters. Their names are Ashki and Nataani. They must be worried about you, Rachel observed. They know I am experienced. In survival, Key said, but yes, they will welcome my return. He looked at Rachel curiously. And you? Is there a family who will search for you if you do not return to your cabin? Rachel sighed. My sister in Ohio is the only family I have left. I wrote to her before the twins were born, but I doubt she's received my letter yet. Even if she had, she couldn't possibly help from so far away. She stroked Rebecca's cheek gently. "William and I were very much alone out here. That was part of the appeal," he said. "Making our own way." "It is unwise to be without community," Key said, not unkindly. "The Diné understand that survival depends on the clan, the extended family. No one person can possess all the skills needed to thrive." "I see that now," Rachel admitted. "William was so certain we could manage on our own. He was stubborn that way." "Tell me about him," Key suggested. "The father of your children." Rachel was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "William was a dreamer, the son of a shopkeeper in Columbus, but he always felt confined by city life. He read stories about the West, the open spaces, the possibilities, and couldn't settle for less." A sad smile played across her face. "He had such plans for our ranch. He could describe every detail of how it would look in 5 years, 10 years. The herds of sheep, the expanded cabin, even the fruit trees he wanted to try planting. He saw the future clearly," Key observed. "Too clearly, perhaps," Rachel replied. "He sometimes forgot the present needed tending first." She glanced down at her sleeping infants. "He was so happy when he learned we were expecting. When the doctor later told us it might be twins, William said it was a sign of double blessing on our venture." "Twins are considered powerful medicine among many peoples," Key confirmed. "Among the Diné, they are believed to possess special harmony with the world." Rachel considered this. "I hope that's true. They'll need every advantage." The conversation lulled as Key added more wood to the fire. Outside, the wind had intensified, driving snow against their shelter, but inside, they remained relatively warm and protected. "You should rest," Key finally said. "I will keep watch and tend the fire." Rachel wanted to protest, to offer to take a turn at the vigil, but exhaustion overwhelmed her. "Wake me if you need to sleep," she murmured. "Already drifting off?" Key nodded, though he had no intention of disturbing her much-needed rest. Instead, he settled into the patient stillness of an experienced hunter, one eye on the fire, one ear to the storm, his senses attuned to any potential danger. During her watch, Rachel found herself studying Key's face in repose. In sleep, the vigilance that normally marked his features softened, revealing a gentleness she hadn't fully noticed before. She wondered about his life among the Diné, about his wife who was a healer, about the path that had led him to be in exactly the right place to save her children's lives. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind another foot of fresh snow but clear skies. Key emerged from the shelter first, assessing conditions, while Rachel fed and changed the twins. "We can reach the camp by nightfall if we move steadily," he announced, returning to help dismantle their temporary shelter. They set off again, Key breaking trail through the fresh snow, with Rachel following in his tracks. The twins, remarkably resilient, continued to travel well in their fur-lined nest, waking only when hungry or uncomfortable. As the day progressed, the landscape began to change subtly. The open high desert gave way to more varied terrain, with juniper and piñon pine becoming more frequent. By late afternoon, they were traveling through a narrow canyon, its red rock walls providing some shelter from the wind. "Beyond this canyon lies the valley where my people winter," Key explained. "We are nearly there." Rachel felt a surge of conflicting emotions, relief that their journey was nearing its end, but apprehension about the reception that awaited them. What would Key's people think of a white woman and her half-dead babies appearing in their midst? As they created a small rise, Key paused, allowing her to catch up. "Look," he said simply, gesturing ahead. Below them stretched a sheltered valley, much as Key had described. Steam rose from several natural hot springs, creating patches of bare ground amid the snow. There, arranged in a rough circle, stood 24 hogans, the traditional Navajo dwellings, their conical shapes dusted with snow. Smoke rose from openings at their peaks, and she could see figures moving between them. Your people, she murmured, suddenly acutely aware of her status. As an outsider, they have seen us, Key noted, pointing to a group of riders who had emerged from the camp and were now heading in their direction. Do not be afraid. They are coming to assist us. Rachel straightened her shoulders, summoning her courage. I'm ready, she said, though her racing heart suggested otherwise. The riders approached rapidly, 4 men on horseback, their faces stern and watchful. They reined a short distance away, exchanging words with Key in a language Rachel couldn't understand. Their gazes moved from Key to Rachel, then to the carrier with its precious cargo. After what seemed an eternity, one of the men, older than the others, with streaks of grey in his long hair tied back with a red band, moved his horse closer. He spoke again to Key, who answered at length, occasionally gesturing toward Rachel. And the twins! Finally, the older man turned to Rachel and spoke in accented but clear English. I am Chief Hastian Tso. Key tells me you have lost your husband and faced death in the storm. He was right to bring you here. Rachel inclined her head respectfully. Thank you for allowing us to come. My children and I would not have survived. Without Key's help. The chief studied her face for a long moment before nodding. The Diné do not turn away those in need, especially not children. He gestured to the other riders. We will escort you to camp. Key's wife awaits you. The final stretch to the camp passed in a blur for Rachel. As they approached, curious faces appeared at Hogan entrances. Children ran alongside them, pointing and calling out questions that Key answered patiently. Rachel kept her eyes focused ahead, conscious of being the object of intense scrutiny, but determined to show gratitude rather than fear. They were led to a hogan near the center of the camp. Outside stood a woman with a deeply lined face and keen eyes that immediately reminded Rachel of Key. Her grey-streaked hair was arranged in a traditional style, and she wore a velvet blouse adorned with silver buttons beneath a heavy wool blanket. Draped over her shoulders, my mother, Azzomonez, Key introduced as they stopped before her. The woman's gaze moved directly to the carrier. Without a word, she stepped forward and carefully parted the furs to reveal the twins. Her weathered face softened as she looked at them, and she murmured something that made Key smile. She says they have strong spirits, he translated. She welcomes them, and you. Azzomonez looked up at Rachel then, her dark eyes assessing but not unkind. She spoke again, and Key translated. She says you must be very tired. Come inside. Where it is warm, there is food and a place for you to rest. As Rachel followed Azzomonez into the hogan, carrying Rebecca while Key brought Robert, she felt a curious sense of crossing a threshold in more ways than one. Behind her lay the life she had planned with William, a life now impossible. Ahead lay an unknown path, beginning with these people who had offered shelter when she had nowhere else to turn. Inside the hogan, a fire burned in a central pit, smoke rising to escape through the opening at the peak. Furs and woven rugs covered the packed earth floor, creating a surprisingly comfortable space. Azzomonez gestured to a prepared area with extra furs and blankets, clearly arranged in anticipation of their arrival. This will be your place, Key explained. My mother sleeps there. He pointed to the opposite side of the fire. I will go to my own hogan now, where my wife and sons await. They are eager to meet the twins. Rachel gently laid Rebecca down on the furs, and Key placed Robert beside his sister. The twins, exhausted from the journey, fell asleep almost immediately. Azzomonez handed Rachel a wooden bowl filled with a rich stew of meat and wild roots. The aroma made Rachel's stomach rumble, reminding her how long it had been since they'd eaten properly. As she ate, Rachel observed the hogan more carefully. Decorated weavings and other personal items hung from the supporting poles. Various containers, some made of rawhide, others of woven plant fibers, were neatly arranged around the perimeter. It was far more orderly and comfortable than she had imagined. Key and his mother conversed quietly. Though Rachel couldn't understand their words, she recognized the affection between them in Asjonez's gentle touch on her son's shoulder, in Key's respectful attention to her words. Eventually, Key turned to Rachel. "I must report to the council about our journey and other matters. My mother will help you settle in. I will return later with Astza so she can examine the twins." After he left, an awkward silence fell. Asjonez busied herself preparing something in a small clay pot near the fire. Rachel, uncertain what was expected of her, remained seated beside her sleeping children. To her surprise, Asjonez eventually addressed her in halting but understandable English. "Key says you are alone now, husband gone." Rachel nodded, unexpected tears springing to her eyes. "Yes, his name was William. He died of exposure just after our children were born." Asjonez nodded gravely. "I too lost my husband many winters ago. Sickness came to camp." She gestured to the sleeping twins. "But you have them. New life, very precious." "Thank you for taking us in," Rachel said earnestly. "I don't know how to repay your kindness." Asjonez waved away her words. "No need. Key was right to bring you." She pointed to the mixture she was preparing. "Medicine for babies. Keep them strong. Medicine for you too. Help with milk." As night fell fully, the sounds of the camp grew quieter. Rachel, overcome by the events of the past days, found her eyelids growing heavy. Asjonez noticed and gestured toward the sleeping furs. "Sleep now. Safe here." Rachel needed no further encouragement. She checked the twins once more, then lay down beside them, pulling a soft sheepskin over herself. Just before sleep claimed her, a thought surfaced from the depths of her exhaustion. She had traveled far from everything familiar, yet somehow found herself exactly where she and her children needed to be. Rachel awoke to unfamiliar sounds, soft voices speaking in a language she didn't understand, the crackling of a fire and the gentle rustling of movement around her. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then reality rushed back as she felt the twins stirring beside her. Asjonez was already awake, tending the fire and preparing what appeared to be a tea from dried herbs. She nodded when she saw Rachel was awake, but continued her work. Without speaking, outside, Rachel could hear the camp coming to life, children's laughter, dogs barking, and the sounds of daily activities beginning. She sat up, checking on Robert and Rebecca, who were awake but contentedly quiet, their dark eyes taking in the unfamiliar surroundings. "Good morning," Rachel ventured, uncertain about proper protocol in her new environment. "Morning," Asjonez replied with a slight smile. She handed Rachel a wooden cup filled with the herbal tea. "Drink, good for milk." Rachel accepted the cup gratefully, inhaling the unfamiliar but pleasant aroma before taking a cautious sip. The taste was earthy and slightly bitter, not unpleasant though different from any tea she had known before. The hogan flap opened, admitting a stream of morning light and a slender woman who carried a small basket. Her long hair was woven with colorful threads, and she wore several strands of turquoise beads around her neck. "This is Astza, Key's wife," Asjonez introduced in her limited English. Astza set down her basket and approached with a warm smile, her eyes immediately going to the twins. Unlike many in the camp, she spoke English fluently, though with a distinctive accent. "Key told me of your journey," she said, kneeling beside Rachel. "May I examine the little ones?" Rachel nodded, watching carefully as Astza gently unwrapped first Rebecca, then Robert. Her hands moved with practiced precision, checking their breathing, feeling their tiny limbs, and examining their eyes and mouths. "They are remarkably strong for being born early and enduring such a difficult start," she concluded. "You have cared for them well under impossible circumstances." "Thank you," Rachel said, relief evident in her voice. "I've been so worried about them." "They will thrive here until the weather permits safer travel," Asta assured her. She reached into her basket and withdrew several small pouches. I've brought herbs to help with your milk production and to keep illness away from the babies. And clothes. Our women worked through the evening to prepare these for your children. Rachel accepted the tiny deerskin garments, running her fingers over the soft leather and beautiful beadwork. These are exquisite, she whispered. I don't know what to say. Among our people, all children are treasured, regardless of where they come from, Asta explained. She looked at Rachel with understanding in her eyes. I know this must be strange for you. Many white people fear the Diné because they do not understand our ways, but you will find friendship here if you are open to it. Rachel nodded, thinking of the stories she had heard about savage Indians back in Ohio. Nothing in her experience thus far matched those fearful tales. Key saved our lives, she said simply. I am grateful beyond words to all of you. Asdza smiled. My husband has always had a gift for appearing when he is most needed. She helped Rachel dress the twins in their new clothing. When you are ready, come outside. The children are curious about our visitors, and it will do you good to feel the sun. After feeding the twins and eating a simple breakfast of corn cakes and dried fruit provided by Azzomonez, Rachel ventured outside the hogan. The winter camp spread before her in the morning light, a harmonious arrangement of dwellings set against dramatic red rock formations. Unlike the military precision of white settlements with their grid patterns, the Navajo camp followed the natural contours of the land. Women moved purposefully between hogans, carrying water or wood, while older children played games in the snow-free areas near the hot springs. Men gathered in small groups, some working with tools, others preparing for hunting expeditions. Everywhere, Rachel noticed, people worked together with quiet efficiency. Her appearance with the twins immediately drew attention. Children paused in their play to stare openly, and several women approached, their expressions ranging from curiosity to frank assessment. Key emerged from a nearby hogan and came to Rachel's side. Did you rest well? He asked. Better than I have in weeks, Rachel admitted. Your mother and wife have been very kind. Key nodded, pleased. Chief Hastin So has called a council meeting. He wishes you to attend to tell your story directly. This is an honor, he added, seeing Rachel's apprehensive expression. It shows he respects you as a person worthy of being heard. What should I say? Rachel asked nervously. I don't want to offend anyone. Speak truthfully about your journey west, about William, about what happened after he died, Key advised. The elders value honesty above all else. Rachel nodded, her mind racing. She fed and changed the twins while Azzomonez prepared for the day. Despite their surroundings being so foreign, Rachel found comfort in the routine tasks of motherhood. Some things, it seemed, remained constant regardless of circumstance. A young woman approached, carrying what appeared to be clothing, a simple dress made of soft tanned buckskin and a pair of fur-lined moccasins. For counsel, she explained, offering them to Rachel. Your clothes. She gestured at Rachel's worn, travel-stained dress with a sympathetic expression. Rachel accepted the gifts with genuine gratitude. Her own clothing was indeed filthy from the journey, and the prospect of clean garments, however unfamiliar in style, was appealing. The young woman discreetly turned away as Rachel changed. The buckskin dress felt strange against her skin, softer and more supple than the cotton and wool she was accustomed to wearing. The moccasins, lined with rabbit fur, were the most comfortable footwear she had ever experienced. Thank you, she said sincerely when she had finished dressing. It's beautiful workmanship. The young woman's face brightened at the compliment. She reached out to adjust the dress slightly, then nodded in approval. Mid-morning, Key returned to escort Rachel to the council. The twins would remain with Azzomonez, an arrangement that caused Rachel a moment of anxiety despite her growing trust in Key's mother. They will be safe, Key assured her, noting her hesitation. "My mother raised 4 children and has helped deliver countless others. There are no more capable hands in the camp." Outside, Rachel drew curious stares from the camp's inhabitants as she walked beside Key toward a large hogan at the center of the circle. Children ran alongside them, pointing and calling out questions that made Key smile. Adults were more reserved, watching with expressions ranging from open curiosity to guarded suspicion. "Many have never seen a white woman up close," Key explained quietly. "Some have never seen white people at all, except perhaps at a distance. During trading expeditions." Rachel nodded, uncomfortably aware of being a novelty. She straightened her shoulders and tried to project dignity despite her nervousness. The council hogan was larger than Azomonese's dwelling. Inside, a circle of men sat around a central fire, some elderly with deeply lined faces, others younger, but clearly of significant standing. Chief Hastien Tso occupied a place of honor, his expression solemn as they entered. To Rachel's surprise, several women were also present, seated slightly behind the men but clearly part of the proceedings. Key led her to an empty space in the circle and indicated she should sit, then took a position beside her. The council began with what Rachel assumed were ceremonial words spoken by Chief Hastien Tso in the Navajo language. A pipe was passed around the circle, though Key whispered that she was not expected to participate in this ritual. Finally, Hastien Tso addressed her directly in his accented English. "Woman who came with Key, tell us your story. How you came to be alone in the blizzard with small babies." Rachel took a deep breath, conscious of all eyes upon her. Drawing courage from some hidden reserve, she began to speak. "My name is Rachel Miller. My husband William and I came from Ohio in the East. William was a shopkeeper's son there, but he dreamed of open spaces and independence. We purchased land in the Arizona territory to establish a sheep ranch." She described their journey west, the construction of their cabin, and their efforts to prepare for the arriving winter. Her voice faltered when she reached William's sudden death and her desperate situation with newborn twins. But she continued, explaining how she had found herself alone as the blizzard approached. "If Key hadn't found us when he did, we would have died," she concluded simply. "I owe him our lives, and I'm deeply grateful to all of you for offering us shelter." After Key translated her words for those who didn't understand English, a thoughtful silence fell over the gathering. Finally, one of the older men spoke, his words directed at Key. "He asks if you intend to return to your cabin when the weather improves." Key translated for Rachel. "I don't know," Rachel admitted honestly. "I have the land, but I'm not sure I could manage it alone, especially with 2 infants to care for." Another council member, a woman with a stern face softened by kind eyes, spoke next. Key listened carefully. Before translating, "Nijoni, our head midwife, asks about the children's health. She is concerned about them being born early." Rachel turned toward the woman. "They are surprisingly strong, though they came 3 weeks before expected. I've been worried about keeping them warm enough and having sufficient milk, especially since my own health suffered after William died." A brief discussion followed in Navajo, with Nijoni speaking animatedly, Key periodically translating the general points for Rachel's benefit. "She says your milk is crucial for the babies. She agrees with my wife that you should take certain herbs to ensure a good supply. She also believes the hot springs here will help your strength return." Chief Hastien Tso raised a hand, silencing the discussion. He addressed Rachel directly again. "You and your children may stay until the spring thaw makes travel safe. Key speaks for you, which means his family's honor is bound to yours while you are here. You will learn our ways and contribute as you are able." His gaze was penetrating, but not unkind. "Do you accept these terms?" "I do with gratitude," Rachel replied, inclining her head respectfully. "I'll work hard and try to learn quickly." After a few more ceremonial words, The council adjourned. As people began to disperse, several women approached Rachel, their initial reserve giving way to practical concerns and questions, which Key translated. They want to know if you have sufficient wrappings for the babies. Winter is hard on the very young. They're asking if you can sew, weave, or cook. This is the blue flower. She lost a baby last winter and has been sad. She asks if she might sometimes hold your twins. Rachel answered each question as best she could, touched by the women's practical concern for her children's welfare. By the time they returned to Asdzomonez's Hogan, she felt a tentative connection beginning to form, not friendship exactly, but a mutual recognition of shared experiences as women and mothers, regardless of their different origins. The days that followed established a routine of sorts. Rachel spent mornings helping Asdzomonez with domestic tasks, grinding corn, preparing meals, and learning to work with rawhide and sinew. The older woman had a patient teaching style that transcended their language barrier, demonstrating techniques and gently correcting Rachel's mistakes without criticism. In the afternoons, weather permitting, Rachel would bundle the twins and take them outside, walking the perimeter of the camp to build her strength. Key often joined her during these walks, explaining aspects of Navajo life and gradually teaching her words in his language. "Why are you helping us so much?" Rachel asked him during one such walk, a week after their arrival. "You've gone far beyond simply rescuing us from the blizzard." Key was silent for several paces before answering. "When I found you, I acted as any decent person would. But now—" He seemed to search for the right words. "I see in you a strength that reminds me of my mother and your children. They deserve a chance at life." He gestured toward the camp. "My people have suffered much from diseases brought by white settlers, from broken treaties, from forced relocations. It would be easy to see all whites as enemies, but my father taught me to judge individuals by their actions, not by the actions of their race." "And how do you judge me?" Rachel asked softly. Key's expression remained serious, but his eyes held a warmth that made Rachel's heart beat faster. "As a woman of courage and determination, as someone worthy of respect." The conversation might have continued, but they were interrupted by the approach of Blue Flower, the young woman from the council who had lost a child. Through gestures and the few Navajo words Rachel had learned, Blue Flower indicated she would like to hold Rebecca. Rachel carefully transferred her daughter to the young woman's arms. Touched by the tender way Blue Flower cradled the infant. As Blue Flower spoke softly to Rebecca in Navajo, Rachel saw Key watching the interaction with approval. That evening, as snowflakes began to fall again outside the Hogan, Asdzomonez surprised Rachel by producing a small wooden box. "For babies," she explained, opening it to reveal 2 tiny pairs of moccasins, exquisitely crafted and adorned with minute beadwork. "First, shoes are important." Rachel felt tears spring to her eyes at the unexpected gift. "They're beautiful," she whispered, running a finger over the soft leather. "Thank you." Asdzomonez nodded, pleased by Rachel's reaction. She hesitated, then spoke again in her limited English. "You good mother, strong woman, coming from—" The reserved older woman, the words held special meaning. "I'm trying to be," Rachel replied honestly. "Sometimes I'm afraid I won't be enough for them without their father." Asdzomonez's expression turned reflective. "When Key's father died, I thought the same. But children grow strong anyway." She gestured around the Hogan. "Not alone. Family, tribe, help. Same for you now." That night, as the twins slept peacefully and Asdzomonez's breathing settled into the rhythms of slumber, Rachel lay awake, contemplating the unexpected turn her life had taken. In just 2 weeks, she had gone from the brink of death to finding herself integrated, however tentatively, into a completely foreign way of life. She thought of William, of the dreams they had shared, and felt a pang of both grief and guilt. Would he understand the choices she had made? Would he approve of his children being raised, even temporarily, among people he had only known as distant threats on the frontier? Yet, as she considered the alternative, death in the isolated cabin, she knew William would have wanted them to survive at any cost. He had been a pragmatic man, not given to prejudice. Perhaps he would have seen, as she was beginning to, that beneath the obvious differences in language and customs lay the same basic human concerns: the welfare of children, the importance of community, the need to find meaning and purpose in life's challenges. As January gave way to February, the winter deepened. Snow piled high around the Hogans, but the camp remained surprisingly comfortable. The hot springs Key had mentioned kept the ground from freezing completely in certain areas, creating small oases of relative warmth in the frigid landscape. Rachel's days fell into a pleasant rhythm. She began to understand more of the Navajo language, though she still struggled to speak it beyond simple phrases. The twins thrived, growing plumper and more alert with each passing day. Robert had begun to smile, a developmental milestone that brought Rachel indescribable joy and a renewed pang of sadness that William would never witness. Key remained a steady presence, though his hunting responsibilities often took him away from camp for days at a time. Rachel found herself watching for his return with increasing anticipation, valuing their conversations and the quiet understanding that seemed to flow between them despite their different backgrounds. One evening, as a particularly harsh storm raged outside, Key visited Azomnese's Hogan, bringing a freshly killed rabbit. As his mother prepared it for cooking, he settled beside Rachel near the fire. "The trading party returned from Copper Springs today," he informed her. "They brought news." Rachel looked up sharply. "What news?" "A man has been asking about you at the trading post. A settler named Edward Porter. He described a woman with twins whose husband recently died. He said he's been searching cabins in the area, concerned about survivors after the blizzard." "Edward Porter?" Rachel repeated the name, triggering a vague memory. "I think, yes, William mentioned him. He owned the adjacent parcel of land, though we never met him. I believe he was away when we arrived, traveling back east to bring his family." "This man claims to be concerned about your welfare," Key continued, his expression carefully neutral. "He told the traders he fears you might not have survived the storm." Rachel absorbed this information thoughtfully. "What does it mean for us? Should I try to make contact somehow?" "That is for you to decide," Key replied. "The snow remains too deep for safe travel to Copper Springs, but when conditions improve, you could send a message with the next trading party, letting this man know you and the children are safe." The idea of reconnecting with the outside world, with the life she had planned before tragedy struck, stirred conflicting emotions in Rachel. Part of her recognized the practical value of establishing contact with a neighboring settler. Yet another part had grown comfortable in the rhythm of Navajo life, finding unexpected peace in its cycles and traditions. "I'll think about it," she said finally. "Thank you for telling me." Later that night, after Key had returned to his own, Hogan and Azomnes had fallen asleep. Rachel lay awake, her mind churning with questions about the future. The arrival of spring would mean choices to be made, whether to return to her cabin and attempt to build the life she and William had planned, or to consider other possibilities that had never been part of her original vision. As February progressed, Rachel noticed subtle changes in the camp's atmosphere. There were more frequent councils, from which Key would return preoccupied and sometimes troubled. When she asked about these meetings, his answers were vague, though not deliberately evasive. "The tribe must decide where to move when spring comes," he explained during one of their walks. "Traditional grazing lands to the south have been claimed by white ranchers. Games have been scarce. Because of people like me, Rachel said quietly, the weight of history suddenly pressing upon her. Key stopped walking and turned to face her. You did not create these conflicts, Rachel. Do not take their burden upon yourself. The use of her given name, something he rarely did, caught her attention as much as his words. Their eyes met and held for a long moment, and Rachel felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the winter sun briefly breaking through the clouds. The moment was interrupted by shouts from the edge of camp. A hunting party was returning, dragging a travois laden with elk meat, a welcome addition to the dwindling winter food stores. The entire camp erupted in celebratory activity, with women rushing to begin processing the meat, while children danced excitedly around the returning hunters. As Rachel watched the community work together with practiced efficiency, she realized how much she had come to admire their interdependence, their understanding that survival depended on each person contributing their skills to the collective good. It was not so different from the barn raisings and harvest festivals of her childhood in Ohio, where neighbors had rallied to support one another through difficult times. That evening, a feast was prepared to celebrate the successful hunt. For the first time since her arrival, Rachel was invited to sit near Chief Hastinso during the festivities, a position of honor that signified her growing acceptance within the community. As the celebration continued around them, Hastinso spoke to her directly. Key says you learn our ways quickly. I try, Rachel replied honestly. Everyone has been very patient with my mistakes. The chief nodded thoughtfully. When spring comes, what will you do? It was the question Rachel had been asking herself for weeks, never reaching a definitive answer. I don't know yet, she admitted. I have land, but no means to work it alone. The white man asking about you at the trading post, would you join him? Hastinso's directness was startling, but not offensive. It was, Rachel had learned, the Navajo way to address important matters without unnecessary preamble. No, she said firmly, surprising herself with the speed and certainty of her response. I know nothing about him except that he might be a neighbor. I wouldn't consider such an arrangement. Hastinso seemed satisfied with this answer. He gestured toward the twins, who were being doted upon by Blueflower and several other young women. Your children grow strong here. They have many mothers to care for them. Before Rachel could formulate a response to what seemed like an implied invitation to remain indefinitely, a commotion at the edge of the gathering drew everyone's attention. A young warrior was rushing toward the chief, his expression urgent. He spoke rapidly in Navajo, his words causing an immediate shift in the atmosphere. The celebration was still as Hastinso rose to his feet, his face grave. Key, who had been sitting nearby, quickly moved to Rachel's side. Scouts have spotted riders approaching the valley, he explained in a low voice. Too many to be a trading party, moving too purposefully to be lost travelers. Soldiers, Rachel asked, a cold dread settling in her stomach. She had heard stories of cavalry attacks on Indian camps, though she had tried to dismiss them as exaggerations. Possibly. Or settlers looking for easy targets, Key replied grimly. Either way, the camp must prepare. As the feast disbanded and people rushed to their assigned tasks with practiced precision, Rachel found herself standing in uncertainty, the twins gathered protectively in her arms. She watched as weapons were distributed, as women quickly packed essential items, as children were gathered into groups to be led to safety if necessary. In the chaos, Key appeared before her, his expression more serious than she had ever seen. Take the children to my mother's hogan and wait there. If fighting begins, she knows where to take you, a hidden cave in the rocks above the hot springs. Key, what's happening? Rachel pleaded, fear evident in her voice. His expression softened momentarily. It may be nothing, a misunderstanding that can be resolved peacefully, but we must be prepared. He hesitated, then added, whatever happens. Know that your presence here has brought unexpected joy, not just to my mother but to me as well." Before Rachel could respond, he was gone, moving to join the warriors assembling under Hastien Tso's command. Left alone amid the swirling activity, Rachel clutched her children tighter and hurried toward Azzomonese's hogan, her heart pounding, with the sudden realization that the fragile peace she had found might be shattered in an instant. Rachel hurried through the camp, clutching the twins tightly against her chest as activities swirled around her. Warriors mounted horses, while women gathered children and essential supplies. The festive atmosphere of moments ago had transformed into focused urgency. Not panic, she noted, but the disciplined response of people who had faced threats before. Azzomonese was already preparing when Rachel reached the hogan efficiently, packing a hide bag with dried food, water skins, and extra blankets for the twins. She looked up as Rachel entered, her weathered face set with determination. "Put babies in a cradle carrier," she instructed, pointing to the beautifully crafted cradleboard she had recently completed for the twins. Unlike the traditional single-child carriers, this one had been specially designed to hold both infants, securely while leaving the carrier's hands free. Rachel obeyed, carefully positioning Robert and Rebecca in the carrier and securing them with the soft leather straps. Despite the tense situation, she couldn't help admiring Azzomonese's craftsmanship, the intricate beadwork, the protective willow hood, the comfortable padding that kept the babies secure without restricting their movement. "What's happening?" Rachel asked as she worked. "Who are these riders?" Azzomonese shook her head. "I don't know yet. Could be an army, could be settlers looking for trouble." She handed Rachel a warm elkskin coat. "Put on. Night comes. Will be cold outside." The commotion had organized itself into purposeful action. Women and children were being led toward the rocky ridge east of the camp, while warriors assembled near the valley's entrance to the west. Rachel caught glimpses of Key conferring with Chief Hastien Tso and other men, his expression grave. Before leaving with Azzomonese, Rachel impulsively changed direction, moving toward Key despite the older woman's protests. She needed to understand what they were facing. "Key!" she called out as she approached the group of warriors. He turned, surprise and concern crossing his face as he saw her. "Rachel, you should be with my mother. It's not safe here." "Who are they?" she demanded, nodding toward the valley. "Entrance, where the unknown riders would soon appear." "Maybe I can help if they're settlers." "It's too dangerous," Key interrupted, his voice gentle but firm. "We don't know their intentions." Chief Hastien Tso, who had been observing their exchange, spoke in Navajo. Key listened, then reluctantly nodded. "The chief says if they are military and their purpose is peaceful, having you visible might prevent misunderstandings," Key translated, "but you must stay behind our warriors, with the children protected." Rachel nodded, understanding both the logic and the risk. If the approaching party was hostile toward the Navajo, her presence as a white woman might give them pause. But if they were determined to cause harm, she would be putting herself and her children in danger. "I'll stay with Azzomonese nearby," she promised, "close enough to be seen if needed, but ready to retreat to safety." Key's eyes held hers for a long moment. "Be careful," he said softly. "These past weeks—" He stopped, seemingly unable to find the right words. "I know," Rachel replied simply. The unspoken understanding between them needed no elaboration. As Rachel rejoined Azzomonese, the first riders appeared at the valley entrance, 8 men on horseback, moving slowly but purposefully. Even from a distance, Rachel could see. They weren't cavalry. Their clothing was civilian, their formation loose and undisciplined compared to military units she had observed during their journey west. Through a spyglass borrowed from one of the warriors, Key studied the approaching group. After a moment, he lowered the glass and spoke to Hastien Tso, who nodded and issued orders to his men. The Navajo warriors spread out in a defensive line, weapons ready but not raised aggressively. As the riders drew nearer, Rachel felt as Jomun Nez tense beside her. The older woman murmured something that sounded like a prayer or blessing in her native tongue, her hand moving to touch a small medicine pouch at her waist. The riders halted about 50 yards from the Navajo line. After a brief discussion among themselves, one man dismounted and stepped forward, his hands raised in what appeared to be a gesture of peaceful intent. "That's him," Key said suddenly, appearing beside Rachel. "Edward Porter, the man who was asking about you at the trading post." Rachel studied the distant figure with interest. Porter appeared to be in his mid-40s with a full beard and the weathered look of a man accustomed to outdoor work. He was dressed practically in heavy winter clothing, with no visible weapons beyond a knife at his belt. "What do they want?" Rachel asked. "They're asking to speak with whoever leads the camp," Key replied. "Hastintso has agreed to meet with him, but only if the others stay back." As they watched, Chief Hastintso walked forward to meet Porter in the open space between the two groups. A tense silence fell over the camp as the two men conversed, too distant for their words to be heard. After several minutes, Hastintso turned and beckoned to Key, who moved forward to join the discussion. Rachel's heart raced as she saw Porter's reaction when Key arrived: surprise, followed by increased animation as he spoke urgently, gesturing occasionally in the direction of the camp. As Zobelnez gripped Rachel's arm. "They speak of you," she said with certainty. "Man looks for you." The discussion continued for several more minutes before Key turned and walked directly toward Rachel, his expression unreadable. Hastintso and Porter remained where they were, watching. "He wants to speak with you," Key said when he reached her. "He claims he found your cabin empty, with signs of hasty departure. He's been searching for weeks, worried you might have perished in the storm." "Why would he care so much about strangers?" Rachel asked, suspicious. "He says he knew William," Key replied. "They apparently met in Copper Springs before you arrived at your homestead. William helped him when his wagon broke down on the journey to his own land." Rachel frowned, trying to reconcile this information with her memories. "William never mentioned him to me, though he might have. Those final weeks before the twins came were chaotic." Key nodded in understanding. "You don't have to speak with him. Hastintso has made it clear that you're under the tribe's protection, regardless of your decision." Rachel considered her options carefully. Part of her was curious about this connection to William, this link to the life they had planned together. Another part felt wary of this stranger's intense interest in her welfare. "I'll speak with him," she finally decided, "but I'd like you to be present." With the twins secured in their carrier on her back, Rachel walked forward with Key beside her. As they approached, she saw Porter's eyes widen in apparent relief. "Mrs. Miller!" he called out while they were still several yards away. "Rachel Miller!" "Yes," she confirmed as they reached the small gathering. "I'm told you knew my husband." Porter removed his hat respectfully. "Indeed, ma'am. William helped me when I was in a dire situation on the trail. I was returning the favor by checking on your homestead after the blizzard." His gaze moved to the cradleboard visible over her shoulder. "I see your children survived as well. That's a blessing. These people saved our lives," Rachel said firmly, wanting to establish this fact immediately. "Key found us when we were hours from death and brought us to his tribe's winter camp." Porter nodded, glancing at Key with an expression Rachel couldn't quite interpret. Not hostility exactly, but certainly wariness. "I'm grateful for their intervention then," he said carefully. "But surely you don't intend to remain here indefinitely. Your land will still be there when the weather permits safe travel." "For now, my children are thriving here," Rachel interrupted. Chief Hastintso, who had been silently observing this exchange, spoke in Navajo. Key translated for Rachel's benefit. "The chief asks what this man's true purpose is in seeking you out." Porter seemed to understand the question despite the language barrier. "I promised William I'd look out for his family if anything happened to him," he explained, directing his words to both Rachel and Hastien-So. "We discussed the challenges of frontier life for a family with young children. He was concerned about his wife managing alone if misfortune struck." This revelation stunned Rachel. Had William anticipated his own death? Had he made contingency plans she knew nothing about? "When did you have this conversation with my husband?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "In Copper Springs, just before he left for your homestead," Porter replied. "We shared a meal at the trading post. He mentioned you were expecting twins and expressed concern about the remote location of your land. I told him my own property adjoins yours to the south, and we agreed to be neighborly when I returned from fetching my own family back east." Rachel digested this information slowly. It aligned with what she knew of William: practical, forward-thinking, always concerned with her welfare. It wouldn't have been out of character for him to establish such an arrangement without worrying her. "I appreciate your concern, Mr. Porter," she said finally, "but as you can see, we're safe and well cared for." Porter shifted uncomfortably. "Of course, Mrs. Miller. I'm merely offering assistance when you're ready to return to your land. My wife Abigail and our children are now settled on our property. She would welcome female companionship, and we could help you re-establish your homestead come spring." Before Rachel could respond, Hastien-So spoke again, this time in his accented English. "Women and children are welcome here as long as they wish to stay. Key speaks for them." Porter looked from Hastien-So to Key, then back to Rachel, clearly trying to understand the dynamics at play. "I see," he said slowly. "Well, the offer stands whenever you're ready, Mrs. Miller. We're neighbors, after all." "Thank you," Rachel replied diplomatically. "Perhaps when the snow melts, we can discuss what's best for the children." With that tacit acknowledgement that she wasn't committing either way, the tension eased slightly. Hastien-So invited Porter and his companions to share a meal before departing, a gesture of hospitality that appeared to surprise the settlers. As the impromptu council dissolved with Porter and his men being led to a communal fire for food, Key and Rachel walked back toward Hastien-So, who waited anxiously. "Do you believe his story?" Key asked quietly. "About knowing William?" "Yes," Rachel replied after consideration. "William would have helped a stranded traveler, and he would have worried about me managing alone," she sighed. "But I don't know if that means I should accept his offer of assistance." Key was silent for several steps before speaking. "When spring comes, you must make your own choice. Return to your land, perhaps with Porter's help, or—" He hesitated. "Or," Rachel prompted, her heart suddenly beating faster. "There are other possibilities," Key said carefully. "The tribe moves south when the snow melts, following the deer herds, but some families have begun establishing more permanent camps for part of the year, trading with peaceful settlements." The implication hung unspoken between them as they rejoined Hastien-So, who immediately checked on the twins and reported in her limited English that they had slept through the entire tense encounter. That evening, Porter and his companions departed, promising to return in early spring to check on Rachel again. He left her with a hand-drawn map showing the location of his homestead relative to hers, and a letter from the postmaster at Copper Springs. Apparently, her sister in Ohio had responded to her desperate note, expressing concern but no ability to help beyond prayers. As the camp settled back into its routine, Rachel found herself at a crossroads she hadn't anticipated. The encounter with Porter had reopened possibilities she had begun to set aside, returning to the homestead, pursuing the life she and William had planned, raising their children as they had envisioned. Yet, as she watched Hastien-So's teaching a group of young girls to weave a special basket with little Rebecca sleeping peacefully beside them, Rachel felt the pull of this new path as well. She had found unexpected comfort among people she had once feared, learning skills and perspectives she might never have encountered otherwise. And then there was Key, a man unlike any she had known before, whose quiet strength and unwavering integrity had become increasingly important to her. What place could he have in her life if she returned to her homestead? What future could they possibly share in a world that viewed relationships like theirs with suspicion or outright hostility? 3 days after Porter's visit, Key approached Rachel as she sat outside Aszomonez's hogan, enjoying a rare warm afternoon while the twins napped inside. "The snow on the southern trail has begun to melt," he said without preamble. "I think we could reach your cabin now, if you wish to see it." Rachel looked up at him, startled by the suggestion. "You would take me there?" "If that is your desire," Key replied, his expression carefully neutral. "You should know the condition of your property before making decisions about your future." Rachel considered this. Part of her feared what they might find: a collapsed roof, wild animals nesting. Inside, William's grave erased by the elements. Another part recognized the wisdom in Key's suggestion. How could she decide whether to return if she didn't know what remained? "Yes," she said finally. "I'd like to go. When could we leave?" "Tomorrow at dawn," Key suggested. "We can make the journey in 1 day if we start early. My mother will care for the twins." That night Rachel slept fitfully, her dreams a confused jumble of images: William smiling at her across their cabin table, the twins wrapped in Navajo blankets, Key's face as he'd found her in the blizzard, Porter's outstretched hand offering assistance she wasn't sure she wanted. She awoke before dawn, checking on the still sleeping twins before preparing for the journey. Aszomonez was already awake, heating broth over the fire. "You go see the old home," she stated, rather than ask. When Rachel nodded, the older woman continued. "Good. Heart needs to know, eyes need to see." "I'm afraid," Rachel admitted quietly. "What if I don't know what to do when I see it?" Aszomonez's weathered face softened with understanding. "Heart will know. Always does." Rachel bent to kiss each twin, inhaling their sweet baby scent, memorizing the feel of their soft cheeks against her lips. "I'll be back by nightfall," she promised, though they slept on, unaware of her temporary departure. Outside, Key waited with 2 horses, saddled and ready. They rode out as the first light of dawn painted the eastern sky, following game trails that wound through the awakening landscape. The harsh grip of winter was finally loosening, with patches of bare ground appearing where the sun had melted the snow. They traveled mostly in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. As they approached the area where Rachel's cabin stood, she found herself recognizing landmarks: a distinctive rock formation, a bend in the creek that William had said would be perfect for fishing, the juniper grove where he had cut wood for their roof beams. When they created the final rise and the cabin came into view, Rachel reined in her horse, her breath catching in her throat. The simple stone structure still stood, its roof intact, though sagging slightly in one corner. The crude wooden cross marking William's grave remained visible on the small rise behind the cabin, weathered but defiant against the elements. "It survived," she whispered, emotion tightening her throat. "The walls are strong," Key observed. "The roof needs work, but less than I feared." They approached cautiously. Key dismounted first, checking for signs of animal occupation or other hazards before helping Rachel down from her horse. Together they pushed open the door, which creaked on hinges, stiff from months of disuse. Inside, dust motes danced in the sunlight streaming through the single window. The furniture remained as they had left it, the table William had crafted from pine, the chairs with their rush seats, the bed where the twins had been born, and where William had drawn his last breath. A small animal, likely a squirrel, had nested in one corner, but otherwise fled. The fireplace stood cold and empty, a stark contrast to Rachel's last desperate hours here when the dwindling fire had represented their fading hopes for survival. "It needs cleaning," Rachel said, her practical nature asserting itself through emotion. "But it's sound. We could make it livable again relatively quickly." He moved around the small space, testing the stability of the walls and examining the roof from inside. 2 days' work for the basic repairs, he estimated. Longer to make it truly comfortable for winter, but we have months before that's a concern. Rachel stepped outside, needing air and perspective. The small garden plot William had prepared last autumn lay dormant, but ready for planting. The crude shelter he had constructed for future livestock stood empty, but serviceable. She walked slowly to the grave, kneeling beside the wooden cross. William's name and dates had been carved with care, though weather had begun to fade them. "I kept them safe," she whispered, trailing her fingers over the rough wood. "Our children are thriving. I want you to know that." She felt Key's presence behind her, respectfully distant but supportive. When she finally stood and turned to him, his expression held no judgment, only compassion. "We should return to the camp before nightfall," he suggested gently. "But we can come back tomorrow with supplies to begin repairs, if that is what you wish." Rachel nodded, taking one last look around the homestead. "Yes, I'm ready now." The May journey back to the Navajo camp was quieter than their outward trip, each processing what they had seen. For Rachel, visiting the cabin had provided unexpected clarity. It remained a tangible link to William and the life they had planned together, a legacy she wished to preserve for their children. Yet it no longer felt like the only path forward, merely one thread in a more complex tapestry her life was becoming. The tribal camp came into view, with its blend of traditional hogans and the open gathering spaces where community life unfolded. Rachel recognized that she was no longer the same woman who had left Ohio with William nearly a year ago. Her experiences had transformed her, expanding her understanding of community, resilience, and possibility. The twins greeted their return with excited coos, having clearly been well cared for during their absence. Azzomonez asked no questions about what they had found, but her keen eyes noted the thoughtful expression on Rachel's face, the quiet way she moved through the evening routines. Only after the twins were asleep did Azzomonez broach the subject. "You saw your husband's place," she stated, settling beside Rachel near the fire. "Yes," Rachel confirmed. "It's still standing. With work it could be a home again." Azzomonez nodded, her weathered face revealing nothing of her thoughts. "And what does your heart say?" Rachel stared into the flames, considering the question. "My heart is divided," she admitted. "Part of me feels I owe it to William and our children to reclaim that life, to honor his dreams. But another part—" She paused, struggling to articulate feelings she had scarcely acknowledged to herself. "Another part has found something unexpected here," Azzomonez completed for her. "Something that gives new life." "Yes," Rachel whispered. "Is it wrong to feel this way so soon after losing him?" The older woman shook her head firmly. "Death comes when it wishes, not when we are ready. Life must continue. This is the way of things." She poked at the fire, sending sparks dancing upward. "My son respects you greatly." The abrupt change of subject caught Rachel off guard. Though she understood immediately the connection Azzomonez was drawing. "I respect him too," she replied carefully. Azzomonez's eyes, still sharp despite her advancing years, fixed on Rachel's face. "More than respect, I think." Rachel felt heat rise to her cheeks, but she didn't deny it. There was little point in trying to conceal such things from this perceptive woman who had observed her daily interactions with Key for months now. "It's complicated," she said instead. Azzomonez gave a soft sound that might have been amusing. "Life always is, but sometimes the heart sees a clear path when the mind creates obstacles." With that cryptic statement, she rose and moved to her sleeping area, leaving Rachel to contemplate her words alone by the dying fire. Over the following days, Rachel and Key made several trips to the cabin, gradually restoring it to habitability. They replaced damaged roof sections, repaired the door frame, cleared the chimney, and thoroughly cleaned every surface. Adzamunez joined them on the third day, bringing the twins and assessing the space with a healer's practical eye, suggesting modifications to improve airflow and safety for the growing infants. Word of their project apparently reached Edward Porter, for he appeared on the fourth day, riding up to the cabin with cautious curiosity. Rachel, who was working in the garden while Key repaired a window, straightened at his approach. "Mrs. Miller," Porter greeted her, tipping his hat respectfully. "I'd heard you were fixing up the place." "News travels quickly," Rachel observed. With a slight smile, Porter dismounted, his gaze moving to Key, who had paused in his work, but maintained a respectful distance. "I see you have help." "Yes," Rachel replied simply, offering no explanation. After an awkward pause, Porter cleared his throat. "Abigail, my wife, asked me to extend an invitation. Sunday dinner, if you'd care to join us. She's eager to meet another woman in these parts." Before Rachel could respond, Key approached, wiping his hands on a cloth. "Mr. Porter," he acknowledged. With a polite nod, Porter's discomfort was evident, but to his credit he returned the greeting. "You're with that Navajo camp near the hot springs, Chief Hastinso's group?" "Yes," Key confirmed. "We maintain our winter camp there." Porter seemed to weigh his next words carefully. "Some folks are concerned about having Indians settled so close, but the territorial agent says you've got proper papers from the government." "We do," Key affirmed calmly, "and we seek peaceful relations with all neighbors." A tense silence followed, broken finally by Rachel. "Please thank Abigail for the invitation, Mr. Porter, perhaps when we're more settled." He nodded, clearly relieved to have the conversation redirected. "Of course, the offer stands whenever you're ready." He mounted his horse, tipping his hat again. "Good day to you both." As Porter rode away, Rachel and Key exchanged a look that acknowledged the complexity of their situation. They were attempting something that had few precedents, a partnership that crossed cultural boundaries in a time and place where such boundaries were rigidly enforced. "It will not always be easy," Key said quietly. "No," Rachel agreed, "but few things worthwhile ever are." That evening, as they prepared to return to the Navajo camp, Rachel made a decision she had been contemplating for days. Standing in the doorway of the now habitable cabin, she turned to Key. "I'd like to bring the twins here next week," she announced, "to stay, to make this our home again." She held his gaze steadily. "And I'd like you to stay with us, if you're willing." Key's expression remained carefully neutral. "What, Rachel?" The directness of his question demanded equal honesty. "As my husband," she replied. "If you still wish it." The restraint in his features softened, revealing a warmth and tenderness he rarely displayed. "I do wish it," he confirmed, "but are you certain the people of Copper Springs will talk, regardless of what we do?" "I would rather give them something definite to talk about than live in the shadows of their speculation." Rachel completed his thought. Key stepped closer, taking her hands in his. "Then I accept. But there is something you should know." His expression grew solemn. "Among my mother's people, marriage is not always a lifelong bond. If either becomes unhappy, they may part ways without shame." "And is that what you expect will happen?" Rachel asked, her heart suddenly pounding. "No," he replied firmly. "I offer you commitment in the tradition of your people, one man, one woman, for all our days. But I wanted you to understand the differences in our customs." Rachel squeezed his hands gratefully. "I appreciate your honesty, and I accept your offer in the spirit it's given. On their return to the Navajo camp, they shared their plans with Azomo Nez, who received the news with quiet satisfaction. "Good," she said, simply. "Children need a father. You need a partner." She added something in Navajo that made Key smile. "What did she say?" Rachel asked. "That she is too old to sleep in a hogan again, so she is pleased we will have a proper cabin," he translated, his eyes crinkling with amusement. The following Sunday, Rachel made good on her promise to visit the Porters, but not in the way they likely expected. She arrived at their homestead with Key beside her, the twins secured in their cradleboard, and Azomo Nez following on a gentle mare. Edward answered their knock, his expression cycling rapidly from welcome to confusion to careful neutrality. "Mrs. Miller," he greeted her, "I see you've brought guests." "Family," Rachel corrected gently. "I wanted to introduce them properly to our neighbors before we return to our homestead permanently." Abigail Porter appeared behind her husband, curiosity overcoming her initial shock. She was a pleasant-looking woman of around 35, with kind eyes and a practical demeanor. "Please come in," she invited, nudging Edward aside. "The children are eager to meet new folks, regardless of where they come from." This simple act of hospitality, offered without judgment, set the tone for the afternoon. While conversation sometimes faltered and cultural differences occasionally created awkward moments, the fundamental human connection of frontier families sharing a meal transcended other barriers. By the time they departed, Rachel felt cautiously optimistic. The Porters might never fully understand or approve of her choices, but they had demonstrated a pragmatic acceptance that was the most she could reasonably hope for. 2 weeks later, on a perfect April morning, the circuit-riding preacher arrived at Copper Springs as scheduled. Word had spread of Rachel's unusual request, drawing a small crowd of curious onlookers as she and Key stood before the man of God outside the trading post. The preacher, a weathered, practical man named Reverend Davis, who had seen the frontiers, many unconventional adaptations to difficult circumstances, performed the ceremony with dignified simplicity. He spoke of God's love transcending human divisions, of the sanctity of family, of the Christian duty to judge not lest ye be judged. Chief Hastin So and several members of his tribe attended, their presence a visible bridge between worlds. Azomo Nez held the twins, now nearly 5 months old, and increasingly alert to their surroundings. The Porters attended as well, Abigail bringing a small cake she had baked for the occasion, a gesture of neighborliness that touched Rachel deeply. When the brief ceremony concluded and the license was signed, Reverend Davis offered a final blessing. "May God protect this union and the children it shelters," he intoned, "and may those who witness it today find their hearts open to new understandings of His infinite grace." That evening, the small family returned to the Miller homestead. Now, the Big A Miller homestead, as Rachel had decided to honor both lineages in their family name. Key carried the twins inside, while Azomo Nez prepared their first meal in their permanent home. Rachel lingered outside for a moment, watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant hues. She thought of William, grateful for the life they had shared and the children he had given her. She thought of the desperate days after his death, when all hope had seemed lost. And she thought of the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment, a new beginning she could never have imagined. When she finally entered the cabin, she found Key sitting before the fire, telling the twins a Navajo story in his native tongue, while Azomo Nez nodded approvingly from her place by the cook stove. The scene, so different from anything Rachel had envisioned for her life, yet so right in its fundamental elements of family and belonging, brought tears to her eyes. Key looked up immediately, concerned. "Rachel, what is wrong?" "Nothing," she assured him, wiping her eyes as she joined them by the fire. "Everything is exactly as it should be." Spring blossomed across the Arizona territory, bringing growth and change to the Big A Miller homestead. The garden flourished under Rachel and Aszoonez's care, providing fresh vegetables to supplement the game Key brought home and the occasional supplies purchased from Copper Springs. The twins thrived, achieving new milestones weekly. Robert rolled over first, while Rebecca was quicker to grasp objects placed before her. Both responded to simple words in both English and Navajo, their developing minds effortlessly navigating the bilingual environment created by their unusual family. Chief Hastinso's band prospered as well. By mid-spring, they had moved their camp slightly north to better grazing lands, but maintained regular contact with Rachel and Key's homestead. Several members of the tribe found employment with local ranchers, further integrating the two communities. The arrangement was not without challenges. A detachment of cavalry visited both Copper Springs and the Navajo camp in May, ostensibly to verify the government's authorization, but also to assess potential threats. The officer in charge, a young lieutenant named Wilson, was correct, but cool, making his skepticism about civilizing Indians evident in subtle ways. "They'll be watching us," Hastinso warned afterward, looking for any excuse. But the spring passed without incident, each small success building toward greater security and acceptance. Rachel and Key established a routine of visiting the Navajo camp weekly, maintaining connection with the community while building their independent life. As June ripened toward July, Aszoonez announced her decision to return to Hastinso's camp permanently. "Twins need their own space," she explained practically. "Young families need privacy." Though Rachel protested sincerely, she understood the wisdom in the older woman's decision. The cabin, while adequate, was small for 4 adults and 2 growing infants. More importantly, Aszoonez had become a respected elder in Hastinso's community, her knowledge of traditional medicine increasingly sought after by both Navajo and, surprisingly, some settler women who had begun to recognize the value of her herbal remedies. "You visit often," Aszoonez instructed as Key helped load her few possessions onto a travois. "Bring children. They forget grandmother. I come back and pinch their ears." Rachel embraced her warmly. "Never. You're part of their lives forever." The summer solstice brought the first community gathering at the Begay Miller homestead, deliberately open to neighbors from Copper Springs and surrounding ranches, as well as members of Hastinso's band. Some settlers attended out of curiosity, others from genuine interest in building positive relations. Samuel Griffith, the trading post owner, came with his wife, clearly recognizing the business advantages of fostering goodwill. The Porters arrived with their children, who quickly joined the Navajo youngsters in games requiring no common language. Watching this tentative intermingling of worlds, Rachel sat with the twins on a blanket near the outdoor fire. Robert was attempting to crawl, his determination evident in his furrowed brow as he rocked back and forth on hands and knees. Rebecca observed everything with alert eyes, taking in the unfamiliar faces and sounds with apparent fascination. Key joined them, settling beside Rachel with the easy comfort of a man at peace with his place in the world. "Hastinso is pleased," he observed. "This gathering exceeds his hopes." "It's a beginning," Rachel agreed. "Not perfect, but a beginning." As twilight deepened, Hastinso called for attention. He stood tall before the fire, his presence commanding respect from both his people and the settler guests. "Today we celebrate the summer sun, the earth's warmth that sustains all people," he began, his English deliberate but clear. "But we also celebrate new growth of another kind, understanding between different peoples, respect for different ways, recognition that we share this land and must find paths to live together in peace." He gestured toward Rachel, Key, and the twins. "Look at this family, born from tragedy, nurtured by compassion, growing strong through respect and love. They show us what is possible when we see beyond differences to our common humanity." A murmur rippled through the gathering. Not opposition, but thoughtful consideration. Rachel felt Key's hand find hers, his calloused fingers intertwining with her own in a gesture both protective and affirming. The path ahead will not be easy, Hustinso continued. Old fears and prejudices run deep. But tonight we broke bread together, watched our children play together, shared stories and laughter together. This is how change begins, not with grand declarations or official papers, but with simple human connections. As Hustinso concluded his speech, the Navajo drummers began a gentle rhythm. Young women from the band moved forward, inviting settler women to join a traditional solstice dance. After initial hesitation, a few accepted, including Abigail Porter, who gamely followed the simple steps with growing confidence. Will it last? Rachel wondered aloud, leaning against Key's shoulder as they watched this moment of harmony. Some days yes, some days no, he replied honestly. The world changes slowly, often with steps backward for every two forward. But what matters is that we continue trying for them. He nodded toward the twins, now sleeping peacefully despite the drumming and singing. As the celebration continued around them, Rachel reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. From the depths of despair in a blizzard-bound cabin to this new life-bridging world. Every step, however difficult, had led to something she could never have imagined, yet now couldn't imagine living without. I'm grateful, she said softly, for the blizzard that brought you to our door. Key's arm tightened around her shoulders. And for whatever spirits guided my steps that day. Above them, stars emerged in the darkening sky, the same stars that had witnessed humanity's struggles and triumphs since time immemorial. In their eternal light, the differences that seemed so momentous to those gathered below, differences of language, culture, belief, and background, appeared as what they truly were, variations in the human experience, neither more nor less valuable than any other. As Robert stirred and reached up a tiny hand toward his father's face, Key bent to lift him gently. He will walk between worlds, he murmured, never fully belonging to either, but perhaps building bridges between both. Both of them will, Rachel agreed, gathering Rebecca into her arms as the little girl awakened. And they'll be stronger for it, not weaker. In the firelight's glow, two cultures cautiously reached toward understanding. In the space between, a family created from crisis and compassion stood as a living testament to possibility. Rachel's gaze moved from her husband to her children, and then to the diverse gathering around them. Navajo elders with their dignified bearing, settler families with their cautious openness, children of both worlds playing without concern for boundaries adults had created. Her mother had once told her that home wasn't a place, but a feeling. Standing there with the family she had never expected to have, surrounded by a community she was helping to build, Rachel finally understood what that meant. They faced an uncertain future in a harsh land, with prejudices and practical challenges that wouldn't disappear overnight. But tonight, under the vast Arizona sky, they had created something rare and precious, a moment of genuine connection across the divisions that so often separated humanity. And in that moment, Rachel felt a quiet certainty that whatever storms might come, they would weather them together, just as they had weathered the blizzard that had changed their lives forever. Summer unfolded across the Arizona territory, bringing both blessings and challenges to the Begay Miller homestead. The garden yielded abundantly under Rachel's careful tending, providing fresh vegetables that she preserved for the coming winter. Key expanded their livestock holdings, trading with both settlers and Navajo families for 2 milk cows and a small flock of sheep, the beginnings of the ranch William had envisioned. The twins continued to thrive, growing stronger and more curious by the day. By August, both were sitting up unassisted, and Robert had mastered a determined crawl that kept Rachel constantly vigilant. Rebecca, though not yet mobile, communicated with an expressive face and a range of vocalizations that already seemed to blend the melodic qualities of Navajo with English rhythms. Their unusual family settled into harmonious routines that drew from both cultures. Mornings began with Key's quiet Navajo prayers to greet the dawn, followed by Rachel's simple Christian grace at breakfast. They spoke both languages in the home and decorated their expanding cabin with a blend of traditional weavings and family heirlooms Rachel had brought from Ohio. But beyond their homestead's boundaries, tensions in the wider territory were growing. Reports reached them of skirmishes between cavalry and Apache bands to the south. Rumors circulated of new mining operations encroaching on lands promised to native peoples. In Copper Springs, attitudes toward the nearby Navajo encampment remained divided, with some advocating for peaceful coexistence, while others viewed any Indian presence with suspicion. Against this backdrop, Rachel and Key worked to strengthen the fragile bonds between their communities. Their weekly visits to Hastinso's camp continued, allowing the twins to maintain connections with their Navajo relatives. They also welcomed neighboring settlers for meals and community work days, gradually building relationships based on practical cooperation rather than abstract goodwill. By early September, the success of these efforts was evident in small but significant ways. When the Porter family's barn caught fire during a lightning storm, 3 Navajo men were among the first to arrive and help fight the blaze. When a measles outbreak threatened the Navajo children, Dr. Thompson from Copper Springs rode to the camp with medicines and advice, spending 3 days treating the sick alongside Azdonez and other traditional healers. One clear autumn day, as Rachel sat outside mending clothes while the twins played on a blanket nearby, she looked up to see a cloud of dust approaching from the direction of the main trail. Wary but not alarmed, they seldom had unexpected visitors with ill intent these days. She continued her work while keeping a watchful eye on the approaching riders. As they drew closer, she recognized the territorial agent, James Harrison, accompanied by 2 soldiers, and to her surprise, Chief Hastinso and Key's cousin, Swift Fox. She set aside her mending and moved to gather the twins just as Key emerged from the barn where he'd been repairing tack. "Mr. Harrison," Rachel called out as the party reached their yard. "This is unexpected. Is everything all right?" Harrison, a balding man in his 50s with a perpetually harried expression, dismounted with a nod of greeting. "Mrs. Begay Miller," he acknowledged, using her chosen name with only slight hesitation. "Nothing's amiss. In fact, I bring news that may be of interest to your household." Key approached, exchanging brief words in Navajo with Hastinso before extending a hand to Harrison. "Welcome to our home," he said formally. "Please rest yourselves after your journey." Once the visitors were seated at the outdoor table with cups of cool cider, Harrison explained his purpose. "The territorial governor has been reviewing policies regarding settlement patterns and Indian relations," he began. "Recent reports of success, integration in this area have caught his attention." He cleared his throat. "To be frank, your unusual family arrangement and the peaceful interactions between Hastinso's band and the Copper Springs settlers present an alternative model to the constant conflicts plaguing other regions." Rachel and Key exchanged glances, surprised by this official interest in their personal choices. "What does the governor propose?" Key asked directly. Harrison leaned forward. "He's establishing a demonstration project, a designated area where Navajo families and white settlers could establish homesteads in closer proximity with shared access to grazing lands, water rights, and a trading post that would serve both communities." "And where would this area be?" Rachel inquired. "That's part of why I've come," Harrison replied. The land under consideration includes your current property and extends north toward the hot springs where Hastien Tso's band winters. The governor believes having your established homestead as an anchor for the project would give it a better chance of success. Hastien Tso, who had been listening silently, spoke in Navajo, which Key translated for Rachel's benefit. He says this sounds like another way to restrict his people's movement and traditional ways. Harrison nodded, acknowledging the concern. The chief isn't wrong to be cautious. Similar promises have been broken before, but this proposal includes formal land grants to participating Navajo families, not just permission to use the land, but actual ownership with the same legal standing as white settlers' deeds. This was unprecedented, and they all knew it. Throughout the West, Indian tribes had been repeatedly moved and restricted to reservations with no permanent rights to their assigned territories. "What would be expected of us?" Key asked after a thoughtful pause. "Your role would be advisory," Harrison explained. "The governor would like you both, along with Chief Hastien Tso if he's willing, to help develop guidelines for the project. Which families might participate, how to structure. Shared resources, what rules would govern interactions." The discussion continued well into the afternoon, extending through a shared meal as the implications of the proposal were examined from all angles. By the time the visitors prepared to depart, a tentative agreement had been reached. Hastien Tso would consult with his band about which families might wish to participate. Key and Rachel would help map the proposed settlement area, identifying crucial water sources and grazing lands. Harrison would return in 2 weeks with preliminary paperwork and a surveyor. As they watched the dust from the departing party fade into the distance, Rachel turned to Key. "Do you think it can work? Or is this just another empty promise?" Key's expression was thoughtful. "Harrison is different from most government men I've encountered. I believe he genuinely wants this to succeed. But whether the territorial officials behind him are equally sincere," he shrugged, "that remains to be seen." "It could mean so much," Rachel said softly, watching the twins playing with a basket of pine cones. "A place where children like ours could grow up without constantly navigating between separate worlds." Key nodded, placing an arm around her shoulders. "A worthy vision, but one that will require much work to realize." The next 2 weeks passed in a flurry of activity. Rachel and Key rode the boundaries of the proposed settlement area with Hastien Tso and several other Navajo leaders, identifying critical resources and discussing potential homestead locations. They hosted meetings with interested settler families, including the Porters and 3 other households who expressed openness to the arrangement. Not everyone embraced the idea. At a community gathering in Copper Springs, several ranchers voiced strong opposition to any formalized Indian presence in the area. The owner of the saloon declared he wouldn't serve savages, regardless of government approvals. But to Rachel's surprise, Samuel Griffith, whose trading post stood to benefit economically from the arrangement, argued persuasively for giving the project a chance. "Times are changing," he told the assembled settlers. "Fighting over every acre hasn't brought peace or prosperity to any territory. Maybe there's another way forward." By the time Harrison returned with the surveyor, 4 Navajo families had committed to establishing permanent homesteads in the designated area, and 5 settler families had agreed to participate. The proposed settlement would include shared grazing areas, a small schoolhouse, and eventually a trading post overseen by a mixed council of Navajo and white representatives. The paperwork Harrison brought included something extraordinary: land. Grant certificates for the participating Navajo families, complete with the territorial governor's seal. As Key translated the documents for Hastien Tso and the others, Rachel saw disbelief give way to cautious hope in their expressions. "My father would never have imagined this day," one elder commented, running weathered fingers over the elaborate certificate. "Our people own land in the white man's way." "The paper alone guarantees nothing," Huston So reminded them pragmatically. It is how we build together that will determine if this dream becomes real. The surveying took several days, during which the Big A. Miller homestead became the center of operations. Each evening, participants from both communities gathered around their fire to discuss plans and address concerns. Gradually, what had begun as a government initiative evolved into a community-driven vision, with practical ideas emerging from those who would live with the consequences. Rachel found herself serving as an unexpected bridge between the groups. White women who might have hesitated to speak directly to Navajo men would share their thoughts with her. In turn, Navajo women who had learned to distrust white authorities would confide their fears about the arrangement, which she could then address in larger discussions. One evening, as the planning sessions were winding down, Abigail Porter approached Rachel as she nursed Rebecca beside the fire. "I never thought I'd see anything like this," Abigail admitted, settling beside her. "When Edward first suggested moving to the territory, I imagined we'd be surrounded only by people like ourselves." Rachel smiled. "Life has a way of upending our expectations." "Indeed it does," Abigail agreed, watching as her own children played. A game of marbles with the son of Swift Fox, a complex mixture of rules they'd apparently negotiated themselves. "I'm still not certain this settlement will work in the long run. There's so much history pushing against it." "I share those doubts sometimes," Rachel acknowledged. "But then I look at the twins and think about the world they're growing into. I want them to know both sides of their heritage, to move between communities without feeling torn apart by them." Abigail nodded thoughtfully. "Your children have opened a door in a way. Before meeting them, seeing how they respond to both you and Key, I'm not sure I would have believed what you're attempting was possible." As October painted the landscape in russet and gold, preparations for the new settlement progressed steadily. The participating Navajo families began constructing more permanent dwellings for the winter, combining traditional Hogan designs with features borrowed from settler cabins. 2 settler families broke ground on their new homesteads, with community assistance from both groups accelerating the work. The centerpiece of the emerging settlement would be a community building serving multiple purposes: school, meeting hall, and shelter during severe weather. Huston So suggested placing it at the midpoint between the Navajo and settler sections, a physical manifestation of their bridge-building intentions. On a golden autumn Saturday, the entire community gathered for the ceremonial groundbreaking of this central building. Reverend Davis had traveled from his circuit to attend, as had a Navajo Hatui, medicine man, from a neighboring band. Representatives from the territorial government arrived with additional supplies, and crucially, a young woman from the east who had agreed to serve as the settlement's first teacher. As the diverse group assembled at the chosen site, Rachel stood, with her family at the front, the twins now nearly 9 months old and more animated than ever. Robert strained in her arms, eager to be down exploring, while Rebecca observed the proceedings solemnly from Key's secure embrace. Chief Huston So stepped forward first, his dignified presence commanding immediate attention. He spoke in Navajo, with Key translating his words to English. "We gather today to create something not seen before in this territory, a place where the Diné and the white settlers build together rather than push against each other. Many will. Watch what happens here. Some hope we will fail. Others pray we will succeed. What matters is not their eyes upon us, but the paths we create for our children to walk." Reverend Davis followed, his weathered face solemn. "The Lord commands us to love our neighbors as ourselves. Today, we expand our understanding of who our neighbors are. May this building serve not just as shelter for bodies, but as sanctuary for the human spirit that unites us all, regardless of our origins." The territorial agent, Harrison, spoke briefly, reiterating the government's commitment to the project and introducing Miss Eleanor Walton, the new teacher. a slender woman with intelligent eyes and a determined set to her jaw. "I came west, believing education could build bridges where politics has failed," Miss Walton told the gathering. "In this school, children from different traditions will learn side by side, not just reading and arithmetic, but understanding and respect for each other's ways." The ceremonial turning of the first soil involved representatives from all participants. Hastian So and the oldest settler, John Foster, dug the first shovelful together. They were followed by a Navajo mother, and Abigail Porter, representing the women who would ensure the community's daily functioning. Finally, in a moment that brought tears to many eyes, two children, Swift Fox's son and Porter's daughter, turned soil together, their small hands guided by their fathers. As the ceremony concluded and the community moved to the tables laden with food from both traditions, Rachel found herself approached by Miss Walton. "Mrs. Begay Miller," the teacher greeted her. "I've heard so much about your family. You've created quite a precedent here." Rachel smiled, adjusting Robert on her hip. "Not intentionally, I assure you. We were simply trying to survive." "Sometimes the most profound changes begin that way," Miss Walton observed. "I'd like to speak with you further about the twins' education when they're older. Children who navigate multiple worlds from birth have unique needs and gifts." The autumn celebration extended into evening, with music from both cultures creating an unusual but harmonious backdrop. Navajo drums accompanied a settler's fiddle, while traditional dances were demonstrated and tentatively attempted by those from the other community. As darkness fell, Key built a large central fire, and the gathering grew quieter, more reflective. Rachel sat with the now sleeping twins, wrapped snugly against the evening chill, watching as Hastian So and John Foster engaged in a lengthy conversation through a translator, their initial formality gradually yielding to genuine exchange. As Zon Nez settled beside her, the elder's presence a comforting constant in this swirl of change. "Good beginning," she commented, her English having improved steadily over the months of regular contact. "Yes," Rachel agreed, "but only a beginning. All life is just beginning," the older woman replied philosophically. "Each sunrise, each new child." She brushed a gentle finger across Rebecca's sleeping cheek. "These little ones, they are the bridge, not built of wood or stone, but of flesh and spirit." Rachel nodded, understanding the profound truth in her words. The settlement might succeed or fail in the years to come. The tenuous goodwill established today might strengthen or fracture under future pressures. But the twins and other children like them would carry forward the possibility of integration regardless of official policies or boundaries. As the gathering began to disperse, families returning to their respective homes until the new settlement was fully established, Key found Rachel by the fire. He settled beside her, his arm a warm weight across her shoulders in the cooling night. "What are you thinking?" he asked softly, noting her contemplative expression. "About journeys," she replied. "The one that brought me here from Ohio. The one that led you to my cabin door in the blizzard." She glanced down at their sleeping children. "The one these two are just beginning." Key followed her gaze, his expression softening. "The Diné have a saying, one does not travel the same path twice, for both the path and the traveler are changed by the journey." "We certainly have been," Rachel acknowledged, thinking of the frightened, desperate widow she had been less than a year ago, and the woman she had become, still learning, still adapting, but firmly rooted in both her old values and new understandings. Above them, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, the same stars that had guided both their peoples for countless generations. Rachel remembered a night long ago in Ohio when William had first told her about his dreams of western land and open skies. How different reality had proven from his imaginings. How much more complex, more challenging, and ultimately more enriching than either of them could have envisioned. Was it worth it? she asked softly, almost to herself. All the pain and fear and loss that brought us to this moment? Key considered her question with the thoughtful deliberation she had come to value so deeply. I believe that hardship, like fire, either destroys or strengthens, he finally said. For us, it forged something new, not erasing what came before, but transforming it into something neither of us could have created alone. Rachel leaned into his embrace, watching as the community fire burned lower, its light illuminating the diverse faces of those who lingered. Navajo elders with their dignity and resilience, settler families with their determination and pragmatism, children of both worlds playing without awareness of the boundaries their parents were working to overcome. The twins stirred simultaneously, as they often did, stretching tiny limbs before settling again. In their peaceful faces, Rachel saw the promise that had sustained her through her darkest hours, the future taking shape, one small life at a time. The path ahead would not be easy. There would be setbacks and conflicts, misunderstandings and prejudices to overcome. But tonight, under the vast Arizona sky, she allowed herself to embrace hope, not the naive optimism of her youth, but the hard-earned faith of a woman who had walked through fire and emerged stronger. It's time to go. Home? Key said quietly, rising and offering his hand. Rachel smiled, accepting his help as she stood with the twins. Home, not the cabin she had shared with William, nor the hogan where she had found refuge, but something new they had created together, a place where all parts of their complex heritage could find expression and honor. As they walked away from the community gathering, their children secure between them, Rachel felt the resonance of all the journeys that had led to this moment. Journeys of grief and survival, of cultural crossing and human connection. Together, they had woven these separate threads into a pattern as intricate and beautiful as the finest Navajo blanket, each strand maintaining its integrity while contributing to a greater whole. The blizzard that had nearly claimed their lives had instead become the wind that blew them toward each other, toward a future neither could have imagined but both now embraced. And in that embrace, they found not just survival, but a profound and unexpected flourishing that promised to extend far beyond their own lives into generations yet to come. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.